visual perceptual deficits in autism. I'm really happy to be sharing this information because this is unfortunately not addressed. I'm going to be talking to you about developing a model of vision, the one that impacts learning and development. So let's get started. Vision is not only one of the five primary senses, but it's also the dominant sense through which more is perceived and learned than any other sense. Now remember, I said perceived, not just seen. So let's explain what that means. The eyeball sometimes is just thought to be similar to a camera that's capturing like static images, but actually not so. It's actually more like a video. So it's not only looking at things, but vision is connected to the brain, as you can see, and you will see that it processes color, depth, form, and motion. Now, I'm going to show you this picture. I'll illustrate what that means. All of you can see this, correct? Now, if you can make sense of what this is, please raise your hand. Okay, I have one hand up, 2 hands up. Okay, so you can see it clearly. There's black and white, but can you make sense of it? All right, this is what it's supposed to mean. Now, let's go back. Now, can you see it? Okay, so what you really did here is you applied your experience of knowing what it is, and then you're going back and you're applying that information to the picture, and it's a learned experience that you've applied, and now you can make sense of it. So this is the type of vision I'm talking about, not just about seeing clearly. Now, when a child is learning, the child has to make sense of these abstract symbols that they may not even be able to see clearly, depending how their eyes are moving around and not even having a stable image. They have to assign these abstract symbols to something that makes sense. They have to assign it to something they've learned, something that they've in their a picture in their mind. They have to assign it and understand that it's a cow. We take it for granted. You look at it and you know exactly what it's talking about. But when a child is learning, it has to go through a series of steps in order to make sense of this. So it's pretty complex. Now this is a really important slide, and I'd like you to really pay attention to it. I'm trying to get to a laser pointer. Okay, so the eyeball is about here, and the information that's processed when you go to an eye exam, this is all that they're evaluating: the shape, contrast, and maybe color. However, vision is processed in every lobe of the brain when you're learning. The frontal lobe is eye movement planning. Parietal lobe has to do with visual spatial map, visual attention. The temporal lobes are motion and object perception. And the occipital lobe we already talked about. So this whole thing on the top is supposed to be the higher learning centers, the cortical centers, okay? Now, what happens in the lower center? You have the midbrain, the brainstem, and the cerebellum. This is called the primitive brain, and what this has to do is it has to work almost in automation. That means the heart rate and the breathing centers are housed here. The visual, the vestibular, and the auditory input, their control centers are housed here. So vision has to work with the vestibular input and the auditory, and at a very basic primary level, it has to work almost in automation, okay? And it's imperative that this part, when we evaluate vision, we are evaluating, is this part working in automation at a basic level or not? Because you don't want, when a child is learning, you don't want the really valuable resources to be focused here to maintain balance, to maintain posture. You want the valuable resource to work in automation so that the higher learning centers can be accessed during that time. You don't want to think about it. You don't think about beating your heart rate or breathing. You think about the other, you can focus on other things because this has to work in automation. So this is really an important slide. Now, they did a vision study in Texas, a very unique study where they're evaluating actual visual skills, not just acuity. And what did they find? They found that as you go higher up in grades, they found that the kids actually failed. They did better in the first grade, but they failed one or more visual skills. As the demands got more for learning, they failed a lot more in the visual skills category. Now, what does this mean? Well, it means they're not just using their distance acuity, which is what is tested at school and in a pediatrician's office. However, you need a lot more skills for learning. Now, what are they? Okay, the first one is just the acuity. That has to do with glasses, but that's not enough for learning. You need focusing. Each eye needs to work to the highest degree, switch focus back and forth, be able to team well, be able to, keep the objects clear together, because each eye has to superimpose the images on each other. And the eye teaming and the visual motor skills, it has to integrate with all the incoming stimuli, and it has to be able to have a motoric eye output and also be able to analyze this information. So vision for learning has to go through a series of steps, not just glasses. Now, even in neurotypical kids, you're going to find subtle clues about vision that it's not working well. You can see how they're putting a lot more effort just to be able to access information. You will see that they have poor posture, poor attention span, drowsiness, headache after near work. You will see that writing is uphill or downhill, irregular word, letter spacing, reversing letters. All this is a vision problem. And what happens? Garbage in, garbage out. They're not going to be able to want to make sense. I mean, they're just going to be frustrated. And they will do a lot of reversals because it impacts their sense of directionality is not really solid. And so they're going to have a lot of difficulty. Now, what does that lead to? It leads to a lot of visual stress. There's going to be no symbolic play. It's not going to transfer to learning. They're not going to be able to reason or expand ideas in original and creative ways because their fundamental skills are not in place. So what are they going to do? They're going to avoid anything that has to do with visual information. They're going to substitute listening for vision, which unfortunately, it's not the best way to learn. I'll show you that. And you will see a lot of problems. The child is going to have behavior problems too. Now, their eyes are jumping all over the place. They're not going to be able to make sensible words. These are nonsense words. They're not going to be able to access information when their eyes are not behaving the way they should. And guess what happens? They're going to be a class clown. They're going to be singled out. They're going to be called ADD, ADHD. They may be even put on meds. So vision can be affected in several ways and at several levels. So you will see at the first level, you can have a really bright kid, good potential, but guess what happens? They're still having difficulty reading, difficulty with sports, some type of social problems. So even bright kids, neurotypical kids can still be struggling. Now, at the level 2, you're going to have a little bit more affected. Their visual organization skills are poor. And these are the kids that are labeled ADD, ADHD, and put on meds. So these kids are also struggling at school. Now, what happens if it's even worse? That means they're going to have weakness in visual organization and visual orientation. Now, this is termed autistic behavior, okay? So now, the model of vision that I talked about, maybe we can start forming that model of vision here. Now, you all hopefully now know that vision is represented in every part of the brain. It's not just the one about the acuity. Now, vision is an integrated brain process. It's not just related to the eyeball itself. So hopefully, you agree with me with these first 2 points. Now, let's build on the others. Now, I love this slide. Vision provides the greatest economy of all the perceptual systems, and it can be captured beautifully in this sentence. One picture can capture the description of 1,000 words. Okay, you all know this very well. If you had to explain this, you would probably take 2 pages to explain the colors and the scenery and what it represents. But if you want to be efficient, you want to have good visual skills and visual perception. So having good vision means you're having good efficiency, and you want to develop that to the highest degree, okay? So let's start with seeing how vision really develops. Okay, this is a picture of a healthy child. This healthy child is interacting with the world, touching, tasting, and trying to make sense of things, trying to put a square peg in a round hole and realizing this doesn't work. So they're really trying to learn about the world, and they're going to answer questions about what, where, and when. Okay? They're using their vision to help gain maximum understanding for most effective actions, in a multisensory way. Now, in order to do that, we have to see that there's a lot of background information that we need to know how this really develops. Okay, so I need to talk a little bit about something we call primitive reflexes. Okay, that these reflexes are seen during the first year, since birth up to a year. So you will see that there are some reflexes the child has to exhibit in order to let us know that the nervous system is good, is efficient, is healthy. And okay, first of all, what is a reflex? It's an involuntary response to stimuli. When you touch an object which is hot, you automatically withdraw. You don't think and say, oh, it is hot, let me pull my hand away. It's an involuntary response. So it's handled by that primitive brain, automatic, okay? So when a child is born, it doesn't it's not developed the cortical skills yet to think and act on the stimuli that it's born with. It has, the midbrain is still helping out, okay? So it has some inborn reflexes that the child exhibits. So basically, when a child is born, the physician is evaluating the presence of certain reflexes and the strength of that reflex. So these reflexes now, they have an order in which they develop. Some are at birth, they have certain reflexes. Then a few months later, there are some other reflexes that are added. And some of them, they have to last a certain time, and then they're either replaced and afterwards, you have other reflexes. So there is an order in which these reflexes are developed in this, or are seen in the child. So if those reflexes, for example, are still persistent beyond a certain number of months for that reflex, then it's like a red flag. What's going on? That means there is a sign of a brain damage or something. So this is really important. Now, there are so many types of reflexes, and I'm just going to talk to you about a few of them. Motor reflex, rooting reflex, grasp reflex. A little child, if you go and just have a finger there, immediately the child grasps. Now, as an adult, you don't do that. It's kind of abnormal if that reflex is still persistent as an adult. Even though there are rudiments of some reflexes that are still seen, the blinking reflex, the cough reflex, the gag, sneeze and yawn. So those are some of those reflexes. Now, why are these reflexes even present? It's present because the child needs to protect itself for nutrition, the rooting reflex, the survival. Like I said, it needs to have certain responses to stimuli just to show that it needs to protect itself. So these primitive reflexes eventually, are involuntary. It's not under their control. However, they are transformed into postural reflexes. Okay, so these are the precursors to developmental postural reflexes, and it has to, transition into postural reflexes that are controlled by the higher brain centers, the cortical. So it's now moving from that primitive reflex, the primitive brain, to the higher brain centers, the postural. So this is an important transition that needs to take place. So let's talk a little bit more about the reflexes, just a few of them. Primitive reflex, it's called the Moro reflex. Now, what is this? The Moro reflex is the startle reflex. When a child is born, it's bombarded with light, sound, touch, and you will see that the child throws up the arms like that and startles. Now, as an adult, you're not going to do that. You might just jump a little bit. So you need to transition, but this is an extreme, it's called the mother of all reflexes. And it has to be present at birth, but it has to transition and wean out, by 6 months. If it is present beyond that, then it's a red flag. So it's an important reflex that needs to be evaluated. Now, this one, this reflex is critical for the development in upright posture. When the baby looks up, the arms and legs straighten, kind of like the Superman pose. And this is important it's linked to balance and muscle tone. So this is at around 2 or 3 months, and it's supposed to be lasting for the first year of life. Now, this one is supposed to be present 20 months at utero, and it's supposed to be, weaned out by 9 months. Basically, what it is on the spine, when the baby's on the stomach, on one side of the spine, if you run your finger through, the hip on that side curls to that one side. So this is one of the reflexes. So it's important during birthing process and later to achieve balance when the child is creeping and crawling. Now, this is a real Superman here, okay? Basically what that means, the child, when it's turning to one side, the limbs are extended towards that side and flexing towards the other, and that's supposed to help in eye-hand coordination, body awareness. And this is another one where, another reflex about flexion and extension of arms that's present, and its persistence can inhibit sitting, standing, and walking. So it needs to appear at a certain age, and it's supposed to wean away at a later stage. Now, what if these primitive reflexes decide they're going to hang around? Okay, they don't want to be weaned away. I mean, basically, they're still controlled by that primitive brain, and they're not transitioning into that cortical control because it's not maturing. It's not transitioning. So the nervous system isn't maturing, and you will see some of these reflexes are still hanging in there. So, and how do we find out? How does it exhibit in an older child that these reflexes are still present? So the first motto, the startling reflex, if it's still present later, it shows that the child can have hypersensitivity. It's stimulus bound. It cannot ignore peripheral stimuli, sensory overload, emotional and social immaturity, dislike of change or surprise, poor adaptability, allergy, and lowered immunity. Well, I guess some of you can relate to what this all is. The Superman pose, this one has difficulty with tendency to walk on, difficulty, with postural problems, tends to walk on toes, orientation and spatial difficulties with a direct impact on concept of time, sequencing difficulties, a greater tendency to reverse letters, and so on and so forth. You will see that spinal gland is associated with bedwetting. Then the next one, can have impairment in visual tracking, difficulty crossing the midline, eye-hand coordination, etc., etc. And the last one, again, poor eye-hand coordination, inattention, hyperactivity. So I guess you can understand that, these reflexes are critical, that they be transformed into the postural reflexes after a certain age. Okay, now, let's have some fun. I would like all of you to close your eyes and pay attention to the sound. And let's see. Oops. I did something. Just a minute, I'm getting something set up here. Okay. I changed it. Okay. All right, close your eyes, please.
Okay, here we go. Baba. 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 Baba.
Okay, open your eyes and look at it
Baba.
and listen.
Baba. Baba. Baba.
Okay, so what did you find? Did you find a difference when you closed your eyes versus when you opened? So when you closed your eyes, the sound was Baba with a B. When you opened your eyes, Dada or something like that. It's not Baba anymore. So basically what I was trying to illustrate is your vision overrides your sense of hearing. Your vision is your dominant sense. So this is huge This is critical. This is what I mean. Your vision definitely is your dominant sense. Now, in my office, I do a little workshop, and I can, show you that it overrides your sense of touch, how your vision can distort what you're actually seeing and overrides your sense of touch also. So it's pretty dramatic, just like this little video, okay? So that's just another concept I wanted to share. Okay, now going back to our primitive reflexes and going back to symptoms that a child with autism may exhibit: lack of eye contact, poor reading of gestural cues, visual and auditory, poor social boundaries, bumping, poor personal space, toe walking. Does that ring a bell? Gait disturbance, poor attention and distractibility, poor daily organization skills, and everything is, everything is left to association and memory because they have poor comprehension. They need to tag on to something, whatever they learn. And what you really see, all the stimming, it's just a solution to how they are coping with the world. So to us it looks odd, but it's just their way of dealing what they're seeing in their world. They're squinting, they're closing an eye, short attention span, or staring at objects, flapping hands, flicking objects in front of eyes, looking at objects sideways, because if they look straight, they may see double. Their eyes are not coordinated. Okay, fearful of change in doorways, flooring or stairway, because no depth perception. So they're bumping into things, they touch everything. Fascinated by light, shadows, shiny objects. So everything had better be the same. They don't like change, they can't adapt to things. They're trapped in a body that they don't feel secure because nothing is the same. And they're trying to deal with it. They have anxiety, they have insecurity. They want to hang on to something that they can connect with. They want the same clothes, they want the same routine, the same ritual, okay, the same placement, same floor with mom. I better stick with what I see. They're visually bound. They're anxious. I don't want to get lost in space. I won't be able to find you. I will stay on the same floor as you do. I do not know what to do next. They can't plan. So the child is trapped in a body in a very insecure world, and they can't predict what's going to happen next. So is it little wonder that they scream, they cry, they hang on to things? So with whatever they do, it's because they are in this insecurity all the time. So another concept here is, eye turns. We see a really high incidence of eye turns in children. Why? Because, this is linked to crawling. Did that child have that proper developmental stage since birth? Did they crawl with both their arms and legs properly? Now, this is a precursor. If not, if they've, skipped over that step or gone through it really quickly, we do see a lot of kids with their eyes not stable and coordinated. Okay, so this is an important question we ask with any child that comes for an evaluation for a crossed or a lazy eye. So we see 50% of children on the spectrum versus 4% in the general population. And the answer is not cutting the eye muscle with surgery, because this is rooted in the neural dysfunction in their body. So the functional model is sensory misalignment caused by an infant's unconscious adaptive responses to a neural dysfunction. So it's rooted in those primitive reflexes. Okay, so it's important that you don't consider strabismus surgery for these children, because even if it's done, it's going to reappear because it's going to shift again, because there's no wiring, the eye-brain connections, and it's not wired in their body. Okay, I need to introduce just one more concept here. Ambient vision, focal vision. Ambient vision is controlled by that primitive brain. It's the context, the peripheral vision, and then you need to have your focal vision to make sense of the details. So you need the global and the focal vision, and you need these to be in harmony, in balance. Sometimes you want more of the ambient, sometimes you want more of the focal, and you need to be able to adapt and switch from ambient to focal, constantly in order to make sense of the world. But what do we see? In kids with the autism spectrum, we see superior processing of fine detail. Okay, they're locked into that fine detail. they have inferior processing of the global, the context of which that detail is. So they're just, tunnel vision almost. So they don't get the whole picture. And they have impaired motion perception. Okay, that really impairs them too. So what can we do? We have these magic tools called, ambient lenses. Basically what we're trying to do is we are trying to make them a little bit more self-regulated so they can, be able to be engaged a little more, okay, so that they're not so distracted. So we try to find out, it's kind of a behavioral exam, so we are evaluating for constraints in visual ability and responses to some lenses. Okay, we may evaluate posture. How does the patient hold his or her head and body? Are they toes in, toe out? How are they paying attention? Is it global? Is it focal? How are they responding? Are they shutting down one sensory to, attend to something else? Are they relaxed? Are they tensed? Are they stimming more? So, we evaluate responses to these lenses, and there was a question asked by someone, how do you get these children to really wear these glasses? Do they yank it out? Yes, they will yank it out if it's not helping them. But if it is helping them, trust me, they will come and ask for it. So once you get the right, sort of lenses, it will help them. They will keep it on. So we evaluate and we go further and we have a training sequence for them, sensory learning and visual training to build their visual perceptual skills. So we start with the general movement. Look at the first one, developmental reflexes sustained. We have to evaluate, are their primitive reflexes still persisting? Are they integrated or not? This is primary. This is the first thing we have to find out. Do they have a mental map of their body? Okay, do they have an understanding of where they are in space? How are they, in relation to other things, other objects? Are they able to coordinate? Are they able to balance? So they need to first be able to be comfortable in their body, in the space, and how they're, relating to each other. And they need to really feel really comfortable before we start introducing more things. So you can see the little kid is wearing the prism glasses, to improve their engagement, okay, with the outside world without having a lot of stimming. So we may use large objects, we may use colorful objects, we may use a lot of movement, we use a lot of, activities, interactive, crossing the midline, which helps in binocularity, tracking, so we start introducing activities, slowly building on the gross motor to the, fine motor, and then we go on to the really fine details. Now with the, fine ocular motor skills, are they able to track, really smoothly and efficiently with no head movement? Now you can't take a child that is squirmy, that doesn't understand where they are in space and how they relate to things. You can't work with them on their ocular motor skills like right away. You need to build their ability to get to this point to be able to be attentive to detail. So now we're working on tracking skills, on fixation. It should be precise at distance and near points, their ability to focus with both eyes stress-free, and their eye teaming should be efficient. Now we work on visual thinking. Do they understand the concept of same? Are they able to create and hold a mental image? Can they manipulate a picture in their mind? So we may teach a lot of, higher level skills like visual discrimination, visual memory, visual spatial relations, visual form constancy, visual figure ground, visual closure. Now these are attributes, these are how you analyze information. So we are teaching them all these skills, all these, little attributes that can transfer to learning. So this is really important. So it's almost like a little pyramid. So we start with the sensory motor, okay, the primitive reflexes and all that. Then we build the gross motor above it, then the fine motor, then the ocular motor. Finally, we have the visualization or the visual skills. So that's critical for learning. You need to be able to build that pyramid to learn. So hopefully this gave you a better sense of a model of vision beyond glasses and eyesight. And unfortunately, it pains my heart to really, when I go to these autism walks and here I am trying to explain, I have parents walking by the booth saying, oh, my child doesn't need glasses, his eyes are fine, and they walk away. It's like vision has nothing to do with just eyesight. It has to do with your ability to process information. You need to have the tools in your brain to be able to put the ingredients like a recipe, to be able to put things together and process it. And it has to go through all the stages. So vision is represented in every part of the brain. You agree vision is an integrated brain process. You agree, hopefully. Now, vision is connected to speech, language areas, movement, proprioceptive centers. Vision directs how we move, carry ourselves, and communicate in the world. If you can make sense of things, you're going to be able to express things too. So you're going to be able to learn, be able to communicate. So vision is a more dynamic, model. It's not just glasses. It's not just eyesight. A side note here about sensory learning. Some kiddos, have a lot of, stimming and a lot of, the primitive brain. I remember I talked to you a little bit about the primitive brain. It has to, be able to work together with vision, vestibular, auditory automatically. It has to be on autopilot. And there are times where you may not even be able to evaluate for the prism lenses because the child is just, completely not self-regulated. It's really difficult. So, excuse me. So what we have is we have something called an out-of-the-box type of program here, where we inundate the child with 3 senses simultaneously. The goal is you fire together, you wire together. Excuse me. So it's a month-long program, and we kind of immerse the child in these 3 senses, and the goal is we want to improve self-regulation. So it kind of opens the door. It's a foundation that we build so that it opens the door for us to, get the child moving forward to where we can evaluate, other skills, and we can work on that and be able to develop and make the child, functionally proficient at everything. So here is a little drawing here. When I talk about visual perception, it's a child pre-sensory learning, and afterwards the child was able to make sense of this and be able to produce something that was more meaningful after a program of sensory learning and vision therapy. Okay, so that concludes my talk for today, and I'll be more than happy to answer any questions if you have. Okay, he's getting, I think, a mic for you.
Thank you. How do you treat the reflex integration piece?
Well, depending on the age of the child, I think if it's an infant or an newborn, you have to evaluate it a certain way. Like I showed you with some of the pictures, the Moro reflex, I think you kind of hold the head and then you kind of drop it a few inches, just to see if they have that startle reflex. For adults, it's a little different. We have them walk a certain way with toes in, and we see their responses. Are they, using, other ways to be able to, follow those instructions and be able to do that proficiently? Are they able to do it well? So there are, certain ways depending on the age of the person. It's a specialized field in itself. So we, some of us are trained how to actually evaluate some of these reflexes to see if they're still retained depending on the age. And then we go through a series of exercises to challenge them and improve the integration of each reflex. I'm sorry.
She says, what type of professional locally would I be looking for?
Okay. Developmental optometrists usually, will have some of this training. Just like with everything else, everyone is trained to a different degree. So you might want to find one that, has this basic knowledge and proficiency. Yes? That's correct. Developmental or a behavioral. There's also something called neuro-optometric rehabilitation. Okay, so you can check nora.cc, and that's one of the websites. covd.org is another website locally if you want to see. And you want to check for credentials. FCOVD is a fellowship, and they may have, a little bit more proficiency, in some of these areas. Once again, it's not guaranteed that every single one may have this. You might want to ask if they do primitive reflex evaluation and training.
Are you aware of any other causes for the tiptoe walking?
I'm sorry, say that again?
Are you aware of any other causes for walking on the tiptoes?
Well, it has to do with the patency of the nervous system, basically, and your ability to, respond to your stimuli and growth. So as far as, what we have seen, it's this primitive reflexes is definitely one of the ways that, will let us know if they have causes. So besides the nervous system, basically that's what we're evaluating, and that pretty much encompasses. So that's usually what we see. Yes?
A few years ago, I read about the Irvine sheets, those colored sheets. Do you know about those, and does it still work?
So the colored sheets, okay, that again is, to a different degree. We remember the last program I talked about, the sensory learning program? Okay, in that, we do have the colored light treatment incorporated in that. So that is a more powerful way of actually treating that child. So remember I said 3 high-level therapies are included in that. So there is an auditory integration program, like Tomatis, Dr. Guy Berard, right? So that is incorporated in this program, and the light treatment is incorporated, the tracking is incorporated, and then the vestibular is incorporated. So you're just very gently, you're stimulating all these 3 senses and making them interact and work together and make them on autopilot. So the brain can access the higher centers, and now they're able to learn, okay? So those sheets may not be enough, okay?
So if a child has these deficits, I'm curious if there's a window of opportunity where if you get past a certain point, that no amount of biomed would help to develop the nervous system in the way, and that you would have to do this vision therapy? Or is it possible that you could just develop that nervous system later in time and then start to lose some of the deficits? Or is it?
Sure. Okay, so have you heard of the term neuroplasticity? Okay. So we also work with seniors who've had a stroke, a brain damage. So we evaluate their visual skills, and we still evaluate primitive reflexes because they can return. So we have people in their 70s, we are still training and improving their skills. So age is no bar, no bar. Sure.
I was wondering if you could explore a little bit more between the vision and the language. How would that help a child? For example, would it help a child if they could really pronounce all their words fine, but their words get jumbled up, or they're not quite sure how to say something?
Okay, so remember I talked to you about garbage in, garbage out? Okay, so one of my colleagues, had a 6-year-old autistic kid that was nonverbal. The child actually touched the floor when the child was walking because they had no depth perception, okay? At age 6, she had this child go through that sensory learning program. And on the 12th day, she said, of that program, it's a month-long program, the child spoke his first word, okay? This is a colleague, a neurodevelopmental optometrist just like me. And you could see that emotion in her voice. She was in tears, okay? This was 8 years later, she was telling me about it. So you realize that this is something that has made a huge impact. So remember I talked to you about the primitive brain? Okay, the child is so lost in trying to deal with one sense at a very primary level that needs to work in automation. So they're just really busy with trying to learn, keep their posture, their balance, their depth, coordinating visual input, vestibular, that they don't have time to process incoming stimuli at a higher level. So once we get this primary primitive one on automation, on autopilot, now the child has time to access the this incoming stimuli, and now the child can, it's almost like you're opening the door. They're not locked into that primitive brain, okay? It's opening the door, and now they're able to learn. So the child, my colleague has done, is now in 8th grade and is actually reading now, okay? Was nonverbal. So of course she's done everything else too. I wouldn't say just this or just that. She's very proactive and does biomed, does everything. She has a hyperbaric chamber. I mean, I don't know, later on, but this was pretty dramatic. After she did that sensory learning, he spoke. She said, I still have that paper in my cupboard, she said. And you could just see the emotion and the tears in her eyes. So it was pretty dramatic. I hope that answers your question.
I just want to speak a little bit. My son is a patient of Dr. Sharif's, and he went through the sensory learning program. And I think for us, it was what opened the door for us. My son had only had echoilia. He was projectile vomiting. He was out of control, wild and crazy. And on the 4th day, we came home, and my husband said, "Hi, Asher, how are you?" And he said, "I'm fine, Dad. How are you?" And we were like, oh my God, is this really happening? Is this actually possible? So I feel like a lot of people don't know about the sensory learning, but it's a really, really helpful and useful tool. I just wanted to share that. That's all.
Thank you so much for sharing.
And he doesn't throw up anymore. He's not wild and crazy anymore. It's like he's so self-regulated. Exactly what he said.
Right. So when he came in, we saw that there wasn't a whole lot we could really build on his skills because the self-regulation was kind of poor, and I thought, it'd be kind of a waste of time if we just enroll him directly in vision therapy. So we talked to them a little bit about it, and they totally were open to it. And we did it, and that made a difference. Now he's enrolled in our therapy, he's engaging, we are able to build on this. So we kind of opened the door for it. Any other questions? All right, thank you very much.